Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to all producers join us, and certainly special thanks to Fanny and Elise and all the IAC folks that work to host this webinar for us today. We just really appreciate the opportunity to collaborate and share about the programs available with FSA. And so we're just going to kick it off and jump in. This is going to be on CRP Grasslands today. I've got some outstanding FSA staff and NRCS folks from state offices on with me today. First, I want to introduce, and just to let you know he's on, he's not going to share any comments, but just to let you know we're excited to have Mr. Steve Dick as our newly appointed State Executive Director. Just started last week. He has served as the Executive Director of Ag United for South Dakota, has a small farm as well, just a great background, and we're excited to have him on board for FSA. And eventually as we go, I'm sure, and throughout the state, you'll get to meet him and hear more from him as well. We've got Owen Fagerhaug is our South Dakota FSA Conservation Program Director, and he's going to talk about the CRP Grasslands sign up. And then we're also going to bring in Brandon Walter from NRCS this time, NRCS state biologist, who's going to share about that prescribed grazing program. And the sign up goes through May 13th. It's going on right now. And I'm going to turn it over to Owen. He's got a great presentation. Certainly, we would welcome any questions as well. And I believe the thing with questions is either you can put them in the chat. If that's, I think how Elise and Fanny you'd probably prefer, and we'll try and watch those as they come up. I think if there's anything else, it sounds like maybe you could raise your hand and then you could be unmuted. Otherwise, in this scenario, it's going to be our presenters and folks that are going to kind of do the talking, but we'll watch for those questions, and we encourage you to put things into the chat and stop us. And Fanny as well, and Elise, you're familiar with programs. If you think of something as well that we can tie in and help those producers, let us do that. But we'll probably start with Owen. He's got quite a good presentation. Brandon's going to have a few minutes on the prescribed grassland grazing program. The other folks on Daryl Duval is another outreach coordinator with NRCS. Just have him joining if you're seeing these names, but it's fun. We'll have Brandon join from NRCS and share kind of applicable programs and pull it together. So since this sign up's going right now and it's only till May 13th, I'm going to turn it over to you, Owen.
All right. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, you're good.
And are my slides showing up?
No.
Not yet.
Can you try it again?
How about
Oh, it looks like
now?
it's coming. Screen sharing starting. Yep. Now just go to screen or slideshow mode.
I thought I did.
Or you got to switch screens maybe.
Nothing yet, right?
Nope. Hit the display settings. We're seeing your notes and slides. Go up to the top and go to display settings and drop down.
Duplicate
And then
slideshow.
Yeah,
Or
try swap presenter. Try that one. The swap with that. Click that button. There.
Good.
Perfect. You're ready to roll. Thanks, Owen.
All right. Sorry for my technical inefficiencies here. As Gail said, my name is Owen Fagerhaug. I'm the Conservation Program Manager here in South Dakota for the Farm Service Agency. And just coming to you today to highlight some of the Grassland CRP ins and outs, ways that we can maximize some points for participants making offers within the program, and hopefully field any questions that might come up as a result of the presentation. So first off, Gail had already highlighted this, but the Grasslands sign up did start April 4th and runs through May 13th. Interested participants must have an offer with at least one signature to make that a valid offer by that May 13th deadline. Those offers then will be assigned scores based on the ranking factors that are part of the sign up process. We'll touch on those briefly here as we go through, but that ranking score then is evaluated at the national level, and the Secretary of Ag determines where that cutoff is, what will be accepted, what will be rejected as far as the Grasslands CRP sign up. Anything that we're discussing today can also be found in these two fact sheets that are listed below or in the blue. Those are part of our USDA website. There's links to those fact sheets. We're going to talk about some of the program information, the maps, the ranking factor locations. We're going to talk about and show the threat of conversion maps, the national priority zone maps, and things of that nature. This hyperlink does go or drill down into the ranking factors that I spoke of earlier, and we are going to touch on those as we go through the presentation. So, to make that offer, a participant would visit the county office in their county. It'd be their FSA service center. They're going to tell the county office the acreage that they want to offer. That might be a whole field. It might be portions of a field, but that would be delineated out or selected to make offer on. We're going to upload and we're going to rank that offer as it's received. The county office will provide the producer with those ranking sheets, the contract, the conservation reserve worksheet, and all the contract documents as we go. We get that offer submitted for ranking. Again, that's by that May 13th. I've already talked about all this, but the secretary is going to determine that cutoff ranking. Once those rankings are identified, there's a list that's sent back to the county office, and the local FSA office will notify participants of their accepted or rejected offer. And then the participant starts work with NRCS or the technical service provider to obtain the approved conservation plan. And all of these contracts, we need to have them approved by September 30th. So they'll be effective October 1, starting the next fiscal year. So here's a high-level overview of some of the points that are assigned, maximum points that can be assigned, and a kind of a definition of the ranking factors. So the ranking factors are identified by an F1 through an F7. Current and future use is the F1. There's a maximum of 30 points. F2 is the beginning farmer, rancher, veteran, or underserved producer. So depending on who the participant is, they can earn points based on those definitions. Maximizing grassland preservation, that's the F3 factor. That's where the land is located. If it's identified in a high priority area, threat of conversion area, there's some already pre-designated locations that earn specific points. The type and kind of cover is covered under the F4. So if it's a high diversity, true native plant mix, they can maximize the points under that factor. F5 is the environmental factors. Again, that's predetermined. It's just based on where that land is located, on what points are assigned. Small scale livestock, that can be for any participant offering a minimum of 200 acres and cannot have more than 120 head of livestock. So that they get extra points if they're a small scale livestock operation. And then there's the cost factor, and we'll talk more on that as we get to that. But producers can lower their offered rental rate to maximize additional points to make their offer more competitive. So now we're going to go into each specific ranking factor and talk a little more specifics. The current and future use, as I indicated, is an F1 factor. It consists of an F1A and an F1B for those cumulative points. So if more than 50% of the offer is expiring CRP, they can get 0 to 20 points, and that's going to be prorated based on how many acres are in each in that expiring field. The F1B point is if that expiring acreage was prior devoted to a CP2 or a CP10 practice. So a native stand, the CP2 expiring practice gets an additional 10 points. Those factors are additive, so it's cumulative between the two ranking factors. The F2, the beginning farmer, rancher, underserved, veteran producer, is a 0 to 20 points. So that beginning farmer, rancher, or underserved can, if at least 50% of the producers' shares on that offer have more than 50% of the shares, they can earn the 20 points. That certification to determine those underserved beginning farmer, ranchers, veteran producers They need to complete a CCC 860, which is a certification form within the county office. And then that populates onto the application and awards those points. One thing to note for CRP Grasslands, that females or women do qualify as underserved and can earn the points through this factor. The F3 is going to be based on where that land is located. It consists of 3 different subfactors. And again, it's where it's located. So if that eligible land is at a greatest risk from threat of conversion, it can get anywhere from 0 to 10 points. The F3B is if over 50% of the offer is in the national threat of conversion. And that again is assigned by the national level. There's certain areas of the United States that are within that national threat of conversion area. And then the F3C is producer driven. If you elect to go for a 15-year contract versus the 10-year contract, you can get an additional 5 points. This is just a high level, 20,000 foot look, I guess, at the entire United States. But you can see kind of how it's broke down by anything in the white is awarded 0 points. Anything in the green is 2.5. The darker the shade, the more points. So your highest risk of threat of conversion is in the Corn Belt and in the eastern United States, where it's more prevalent for crop production. So they're awarding more incentives or more points to try to protect those grass acres in those higher conversion or higher production areas throughout the United States. The F3B, the national threat of conversion, that is an additional layer or points that are awarded. And again, we can get up to 20 points if 50% of that acreage is offered within that threat of conversion. And this factor, again, is nationally, but it provides those points for land that have a less than 3% slope, which are more likely to be converted to cropland or development. And then again, that 15-year contract, we talked about the F3C. If you're doing the 15 years, you're going to get the 5 points. The 10-year contracts are not going to get any additional points. Vegetative cover, this is based on what's on the landscape. So it's 0 to 30 points by that type and kind of cover that's already established. It's the sum of the weighted average scores, and it's rounded to the nearest hundredth. So as you can see here, monoculture stand of grass, introduced legumes is going to get 5 points. If it's a native forb monoculture, it's going to be 10. Introduced any existing 2 or more species gets 10. 4, which 3 would be grasses, 1 would be a forb, you get 20. And then it jumps up by 10 points respectively when there's natives as the predominant grass out there, along with those additional forbs or legumes. So again, it's what's on the landscape, and the producer certifies to that, but then it also has to be verified if it's an accepted offer. Environmental factors, the F5 factor, we've got 0 to 45 points. If 50% of that offer is in the current state CRP general sign-up wildlife zones, they're going to get 0 to 15 points. Same with the state grasslands CRP zone and the national priority zone. The A and the B are set at the state level in consultation with our conservation partners and our state technical committee. And this map depicts the counties in the purple would be the wildlife priority zones. You'll kind of see they follow the Missouri River, and there's also a focus up in the northeast part of the state where there's some high migratory birds and things of that nature. So focus on the wildlife priority zones there. These are whole counties. They had to get national approval to be approved, and at least 50% of that offer has to be in one of those areas to get the points. This is the state grassland priority zones. And again, this is state set in consultation with Game Fish and Parks, Fish and Wildlife Service and our state technical committees. The counties in green, again, threat of conversion, or, you know, they were selected for those to try to promote the enrollment in those areas. The national priority zone, this is set nationally, and these areas, South Dakota has no national recognized priority zones, so it's a non-player or a non-factor in our calculation. Small scale livestock, as I indicated, actually I misspoke previously, it's less than 140 animal units and less than 200 acres. And I had indicated it was 120 animal units. I was incorrect. It's 140. Producers that have more than one farm unit within a FSA office can designate that they could meet that on a given farm. So if you have more animal units, you can limit the offer to the 200 acres and certify to that 140 animal units on that specific acreage. Most likely, or most times though, this is devoted to the true producer that has a smaller farm and operates less than those 140 animal units. And again, they can get the 0 to 10 points based on that certification. So the cost factor cannot exceed an additional 25 points. But if the offer is less than the maximum payment rate that's attributed based on the location of that offer, as you can see here on this next slide, if a producer elects to drop the payment by a whole percentage point, you can see the reflection. So if you drop your payment rate by 1%, you get an additional 2 points. If you drop it by 15%, you can get an additional 25 points. So it's going to have to be worked with on a specific offer, and a participant's going to have to identify what they're willing to basically accept if that offer is successful, because the offered payment rate is going to be what is for the life of that contract. So some questions that we just kind of an overview of what we just talked about for individual participants. How can we make your offer more competitive, or how can you make your offer more competitive? That F2 factor, if there's a woman or a female that's a part of that operation, they can be on the contract with 50% more or of the shares, and they can get those 20 points. You can offer your more diverse stands of pasture ground out there to get additional points. Maximize the length of the contract. That small scale operations can get additional points, and then bidding down on those offers can gain points. Some changes from sign up 203, which would be the last grassland sign up, to sign up 204. We get additional points for those beginning farmers, veterans, and socially disadvantaged. The rental rates, there's a new floor. The new minimum is $13 an acre, and that's down from $15 an acre with the previous sign up. And then there were 7 additional counties added to those national priority areas identified in the Greater Yellowstone Wildlife Migration Corridor area. So there were 7 counties added to that. So here's a depiction of the rental rates throughout the United States. Again, the lighter the color would be the lower rates. So South Dakota kind of has a gradual increase from the western to eastern side of the state as far as rental payments. Iowa would have the highest rental payments for the Grasslands CRP identified. So a majority of, well, I guess it differs across the state depending on the county you're in, but anywhere from that 13 to 50 some dollars an acre. So the relevance of the CRP to a broader USDA objectives, this Grasslands, it's a working lands program. It allows the participant that's accepted into the program to continue to operate that ground as part of their livestock operation or farming operation. There's continued benefits for wildlife and ecosystem service. There's decreased cost associated. So from the USDA standpoint, there's a lesser rental payment made, but still seeing some benefits with that conservation plan that's being agreed to. So those are some of the highlights. This next slide identifies recording that was done previously from the national office, and it's kind of similar to what I'm doing today, but has some additional slides. But this was conducted for outreach and education to conservation partners throughout the state. I can work with Gail and we can maybe get this posted or sent out so that folks can reach out or research and look at this at their when time allows. Some things that are attributed to the CRP Grassland CRP program or CRP in general. There is an adjusted gross income that has to be met. So any participant applying for benefits under the Conservation Reserve Program, whether it be Grasslands or other CRP signups, cannot exceed a $900,000 adjusted gross income. That's calculated by taking prior 3 years average income, and that has to be less than the 900,000. There is a payment limitation that applies to each entity or eligible participant, and that's limited to $50,000 per fiscal year on the fiscal year the payment was earned. So if you're applying for multiple fiscal years, it's cumulative and you cannot exceed $50,000 under the Conservation Reserve Program. So requirements of a Grassland CRP contract. Number one, we got to get it accepted and then get it approved. There will be a plan that's followed for that contract period, and that's developed in coordination with the Natural Resource Conservation Service. And we'll contact, the participant needs to contact the FSA office if there are issues or changes to the operation that may affect that CRP contract. So I'm going to just go pretty quickly through these next few slides. Brandon Walter from NRCS is going to touch on them more. But conservation plans that are developed are going to have some key components when we're looking at what can be included. We're going to have some prescribed grazing. There's going to be some, other upland wildlife habitat management and some things that are in that conservation plan. We can do some cost sharing through the Grassland CRP if there's a resource need out there. We can do some interior fencing to promote some rotational grazing. And then when it affects it, we can also do some water development to be sure that water's available if that cross fencing or there's a water need out there on that offered acreage. These are just cost share practices that are, NRCS's component code kind of talks about what each one stands for. So an example, code 338 is a prescribed burning. 382 is a fence. So it's just more of a reference than anything else. To be eligible for that cost share that I spoke of, the activity needs to promote common grazing related activities, needs to help prevent the degradation of environmental benefits from reoccurring, needs to be included and required in an approved conservation plan. So it's actually going to be documented and agreed to by the participant, NRCS and FSA. Going to be maintained for the life of that CRP contract. And of course, the main intent is to prevent the breaking of that native sod. So how does a participant submit an offer? I kind of talked this at the beginning, but first and foremost, there needs to be contact made with the local county FSA office. You're going to come in, they'll pull a map, identify the acreage that you want to enroll. That work will then continue at the county office to ensure that the land and the producer is eligible. We're going to sign forms, and then we wait to see if that offer ranks high enough to be accepted into the Grassland CRP. And then once that contact is made of the accepted offer, the participant decides to move forward or withdraw that offer and go another direction. So just a short little flow chart, contact the office, talk about your eligibility of that land and the participant. We're going to consult, we can consult through programs, newsletters. There's different ways to interact with the county office, and then you can make that application. Some ways that we can stay connected throughout with current USDA programs or FSA programs is there's a farmers.gov website. FSA utilizes the use of Gov Delivery, their electronic newsletters that come via text or email. And again, we've got text messages and then some social media outlets that also deliver the information. So just a brief overview, farmers.gov, you can access it from the producer level to access your applications and forms online. You do have to create an account, you have to develop a customer record, and then it's through email and things of that nature. The Gov Delivery, like I talked about, is our communication platform that allows subscriptions to receive emails about the programs and services, and it's a direct link to that instant information. Again, you can sign up for that at the local county office, or there is a public URL here that can be accessed and signed up, subscribed at. Text messaging allows real-time text alerts, such as deadlines to apply for programs, filing acreage reports, etc. You can subscribe to those by sending a text to the 372-669. And Gail maybe can touch on this as well, but you also, the text message should be the state postal identifier and the county name. So an example, if you were in Brookings County, you would text to that number, South Dakota Brookings, SD Brookings. And then that would sign you up for those text alerts for that specific county. Here's the social media platforms. USDA, FSA is present on most of these. And as I think even through the group today, I think, you know, we're shared and disseminating information throughout these media platforms. Any questions for myself? It was kind of very quick, but in the light of time, I wanted to just hit the high levels. And
yeah, Owen, I guess I have a question or two.
Yep.
Okay. The first thing is this closes on May 13th, right? The sign up date.
Yes.
So how much of this do you just have to be signed up and then the rest of the process can happen afterwards, or?
Correct. First off, so as the slides kind of indicated, so a producer visits the county office. If you've been participating in farm service, you know, FSA programs previously, you've already got your eligibility paperwork. You've done a lot of the preliminary things. If you've never participated, there is a little bit of some legwork to get that participant eligibility up to speed. But we determine eligible producer and then we determine eligible land. And if it meets those two parameters, the offer is made based on those ranking factors. And then the conservation planning and the other things that work towards approval happen after the national office notifies of an accepted or rejected offer.
Okay. So if you go in, I mean, to the office, how long is the time frame to
To
get
make an
to
offer?
Yeah.
To get to a submitted offer, I would say, you know, I would say an hour visit easy at the county office should get the information needed to get it to a submitted offer. Now, if you've got absentee landlords, if you've got other folks that need to validate or make that offer eligible, you know, there might be some mail time and getting some forms signed. But if you're owner operator coming in on that specific pasture for a Grasslands CRP sign up, it's a fairly easy process.
Okay. So things should be able to be done and rolling by May 13th because we're April 20th.
Correct. Right.
Okay.
Yep.
Oh, okay. Just making sure. Because sometimes things can take, we could be looking into June.
Yeah. And I did have some state statistics. I don't have them wrote down here, I guess, but we had, so I think right now South Dakota is leading the nation in offered grassland CRP. I think we, you know, right out of the gate, 2-3 days in, we were at around 49,000 acres offered. By the week's end, we were at 70 to 80,000 acres offered. And I think when I checked this last Monday, Tuesday, we were over 100,000. So very, very popular program in South Dakota. And of course, it varies by states on the number of acres that have been offered, but
Yeah. I guess I have another question.
Yep.
You're on with IAC, so of course we're dealing in Indian country, and so we're going to be dealing with trust land. A lot of our producers and operators, they own trust land. Does trust land qualify for this particular program?
it can, as long as we can get this required signatures to get to an approved contract. And that would be signing those contracts to for the life of that CRP1. So if they go to the 15 years, we're agreeing to maintain that for that 15 years.
Okay. So just say, for instance, there's two people involved and both people are in agreement. They can go on with this on trust land. Just so the
I believe
producers
the
out
trust
there
land is
watching
eligible.
realize that. Yeah. Okay.
Yep. And the land itself, is eligible for other USDA programs, and as long as it's utilized in that grazing operation.
Okay. And just so we clarify this, because a lot of people, and I'm going to take a chance of sounding really dumb, but that's fine, because I know I'm not the only one who thinks this kind of thing. CRP, people always assume you can't use the land. So what you're saying is with grassland CRP, you are still using the land.
Correct. It's going to have a conservation plan that's applied to it that
Right.
Brandon can speak to further.
Okay.
But it is able to be utilized on a yearly basis, but that grazing plan may affect turnout dates. It may affect residual stubble height that's needed. And those are all going to be year specific based on conditions. We're in a drought year right now, or going into a drought year. So there may be some limitations that may affect that based on that conservation plan. But ultimately, it's to promote better conservation in the grazing and management of that rangeland.
And I know, and I apologize. It's like I'm making you repeat yourself,
That's
but
fine.
I'm coming at this as a producer, and
Yep.
these are the questions that are hitting my brain. Like,
Mhm.
okay, did I hear him right? Did I, and so I know there's a lot of people out there watching. They're just like me. They don't deal with this kind of stuff on a daily basis. So it's almost foreign, like a foreign language almost sometimes.
Sure.
So some of this stuff, I'm like, okay, am I understanding it right? Am I comprehending it right? Those kinds of things. Now you said there's a cost share, like fencing, watering, so all that list that you had. What is just an estimate, the cost? Is it kind of set up like NRC, like EQIP? Is it kind of similar to that, or is it kind of a different?
It's a little bit different for Grasslands CRP. They're project-based, and there's different approval thresholds within our agency. So depending on the cost of that practice, it's depend on who the approval authority is.
Okay.
But I think most times it's 50% is what normal CRP cost share is 50% of the cost.
Okay. So you're looking around there and somewhere around there. We ain't looking at 10%.
No.
Okay. All right. Well, I sure appreciate you answering my questions.
Yeah. And if there's more, we can sure jump back on here. But maybe let Brandon speak to some more of that conservation planning, and we'll go from there.
Thank you.
Are you ready for me to take over, Gail? Is that okay?
I am. You know what? Yep. I was just trying to get off mute, and I will just mention, as far as the with Owen's presentation, he mentioned some links and fact sheets. And if y'all check in the chat, I have posted those fact sheet links directly in there for you, as well as also the link to sign up for Gov Delivery. So hopefully if you can jump on there and see it, we can get those to you other ways. Fanny, we can always get that to you to share as well. But I did, as he was talking, dump some of those in the chat. So yes, Brandon, we are ready for you. This is great to have Brandon Walter also jumping on, because he can talk about the NRCS aspect, a good partner with FSA in your local USDA Service Center office. And I will turn it over to him to share about NRCS, the prescribed grazing. Thanks, Brandon.
You bet. Thanks, Gail. Thanks, Fanny, and everybody for letting me jump on here as well. And I think this is going to be perfect. Owen had a great segue right into kind of once the offer and all that stuff's taken care of, then we, you know, all that application approved offer will then come over to NRCS, and you'll work with the NRCS staff to try to put together a conservation plan that not only meets the needs of the program and the policy that's required, but also the producer needs and the goals and the objectives of the producer. But and I think Fanny, some of your questions on the grazing and some of the requirements there, I just have a few slides here, but I think some of them questions will be answered when we go through some of this. But everybody can see the slides, all right? Are they coming through?
Yes, Brandon, sounds good,
You're
looks
good.
good.
Okay. I just want to make sure of that. But I guess the first comment I'd make is after NRCS receives the offer from FSA, then it's time for NRCS planners to go to work. Time for us to start our planning process. One of the biggest things, the sentence there about meeting with the participant in the field. That's very important. We need to know what the producer intends to do, what their goals are, and what their objectives are. So if possible, if at all possible, we want to be able to meet the producer in the field, and then we need to accomplish a couple different tasks. First, we need to verify that the actual cover in the field meets the offered points received from FSA. Owen went over the F4 cover values, whether it's introduced or native species. That's the number one thing that we need to look for, is does the cover out in the field actually match what was chosen on the ranking? If not, then we may need to make some adjustments in the points when it comes to that. We also need to complete about 3 different inventories that will be used to complete the conservation plan. We need to complete a forage and a resource inventory. We also need to complete a livestock inventory if the offer is going to be grazed. So we will need to know, how many head do you plan to run? How long do you plan to run them? Them type of questions. And then we also need to look at some existing infrastructure that you have out there. Your existing fencing, if you have existing water tanks, pipelines, existing ponds, things like that, and we'll GPS them so we know where they're located. And then if we need to install some additional infrastructure, whether that be some cross fencing or try to get some water out to the center of a pasture, we'll GPS that. And that way we can take that information and provide that to Farm Service Agency. And then if by chance the cover that was selected in the process in the office is not there, in the ranking was not there, then we need to explain the issue with the producer, what we're seeing out there, what the cover actually would meet. We also need to document these findings. And the way we document findings is on an LTP 13. We can use other forms, but that's typically the form we'll document on it. And then we'll get the producer to sign that. If only part of the offer is different, part of the acreage, I guess, is different from the original offer, then we would GPS kind of around the areas to determine, okay, if we have a monoculture introduced kind of down in the wet meadow area potentially, but up on the uplands, the side hills, maybe we do have a good native portion. We can GPS that out. NRCS would then take the sign status review, any shape files, GPS points that we take, and provide that to FSA. And with any discrepancy that you have, photos, we'll have our staff all have iPhones with cameras. We can take pictures of that, what we're seeing out there, just to document, to let FSA know what we actually seen out there. After NRCS has verified the information in the field, we can begin to work on developing a conservation plan. All grassland participants must follow a plan, and this plan is developed to treat and protect resource concerns that are identified during the site visit in the inventory. It is also needs to be tailored to meet the individual participants' land. Everybody's got a separate goal and objective for their property, and the conservation plan needs to be tailored to meet that, along with, like I had mentioned earlier, meet policy, as well as treat the resource that we're trying to protect. Some of the items the producer can expect with the plan. For grasslands, there's 3 major parts of the plan that the participant can expect. The conservation plan will outline the conservation practices that are expected to be implemented. Have some sort of cover management plan. Generally, this will be a grazing plan if it's going to be grazed, but it may be a haying plan or even a wildlife plan, because grassland CRP is to protect the grassland resource. It doesn't have to be grazed. It doesn't have to be hayed. It can be left idle and managed for wildlife. So it is a working lands program, but if somebody doesn't have cattle or doesn't want to graze it, that's perfectly fine as well. It also implementation requirements, which used to be called NRCS job sheets if you've worked with NRCS in the past, but now they're called implementation requirements. They will provide the specific information on how to install both structural practices like fence, water tanks, pipelines, or your management practices like a prescription for a prescribed burn. Although Grasslands is a working lands program, like I said, haying and grazing is not a requirement. However, we need to include proper conservation practices needed to ensure that the cover is maintained for the life of the contract. So if by chance you're not actively grazing it or haying the land, but you are leaving it idle, there may be different management practices. We have a cedar infestation problem, or even just an invasive species infestation problem on some of these rangelands. We may need to install some practices that aren't cost shared, but yet will help manage to eliminate some of that issues. Now this slide here is a little busy, but I'll try to explain what we're going to include in a conservation plan. When we develop a plan, NRCS will need to include the applicable practices to manage the cover. 528, which is our prescribed grazing standard, if the offer is going to be grazed. If the offer is going to be hayed, then we would use 511 as our practice standard for forest harvest management. The conservation practice, whether it is hayed, grazed, or left idle for wildlife, will always include 315, which is our herbaceous weed management. And that's for any noxious or invasive species control. With any CRP, we need to make sure that we control any noxious or invasive species. If the primary use isn't haying and grazing, then 645, which is our upland wildlife habitat management, will be put into the conservation plan. The plan may also include facilitating practices, like Owen mentioned. We may cost share pipelines, tanks, or internal fencing. They will be laid out in your conservation plan as well. It may also include any vegetative management items, such as a prescribed burn or brush management for cedar control or buckbrush control, or maybe sumac control, whatever it may be. Note that management is not a requirement of grassland CRP like it is under some of our other CRPs, like our general and continuous practices. Some of them require a management. Grassland does not require management, but yet a management may be needed, I guess is how to word that, in order to not degrade the resource. If there are cost shared items like your 382, which is fence, and 614 is a tank, 642, some of them practices that are eligible for cost share. If we do have cost shared practices, then we would develop what we call an 1155, which is a schedule of operations, and it's going to lay out the cost associated with the practice. It will have the footage of pipeline, cost per foot that is allowed in the contract. Same with a tank. It'll have the tank, how many gallon tank we need to serve the livestock that we have. It may be multiple tanks. It may be one big tank, but we will design. Basically, NRCS will design our grazing system the same way we would equip based on the number of head that we have. NRCS will also complete a CPA 52, which is our environmental compliance document. We're going to look at the property, determine if any cultural resources need to be addressed, any endangered or threatened species need to be addressed. We'll document if there's any permits that need to be gathered for the project, whatever that may be. It could be some county ordinances, whatever the case, but we'll document that on the 52 and provide a copy of that to FSA along with plan maps. We also need to prepare any appropriate state-specific requirements, such as like I had mentioned, our planning sheets or implementation requirements, to make sure that the producer is aware of what we expect. If for instance, we're doing a internal cross fence, it'll have all the specs laid out, the minimum specs laid out on how we want the fence to be built at a minimum. You can always go build over and above, but we will have minimum specs. Same with pipelines. We'll have a pipeline design, whether that's 1.5 inches PVC 200 PSI or 160 PSI, whatever is needed. That'll be listed on our implementation requirement job. NRCS is responsible for communicating them plan requirements to the participant so that they are aware. We need to make sure that it addresses the identified resource concerns and that it meets the participants' goals and objectives, as well as program requirements. And I had mentioned that earlier. In some instances, there are some applicable state requirements with this program. Now, as far as your prescribed grazing, we don't have a primary nesting season restriction when it comes to grazing. However, with hay, we do have a haying restriction that cannot be completed during the primary nesting season. NRCS or the TSP, we do have some Pheasants Forever staff that do work on some of our plans, and they're working as a technical service provider. We are responsible for obtaining signatures on our plans, on our schedule of operations, on any document that we have. Our staff is the responsible party to obtain them signatures. Okay, this slide here, and Fanny had mentioned, some of the grazing and some of the restrictions. We do have, I sent that out with a bulletin last week, but we have what I call a producer guide that basically lays out this slide here showing the Grasslands CRP offers must meet the following grazing minimum requirements. So there are going to be some requirements that we need to meet. And Owen had mentioned, changing of turnout dates. So we do have the start of the grazing season, change a minimum of 2 weeks in each pasture. So if you start in, pasture one year, then you wouldn't want to start grazing in that pasture the second year. You got to be able to alternate your season of use. We want to have some adequate recovery time. So if we're dealing with some native rangeland, we want a minimum of 45 days rest. If it's introduced, we have 30 days to allow for recovery. And then we'll have some utilization requirements based on weight. And then we have some tech notes here, range tech note number 9, and the prescribed grazing conservation practice standard 528 goes into some more detail on that. So when you're visiting with your local service center in your NRCS office, you can discuss, kind of some more of the ins and outs. So you have a really good understanding. But as the participant, you'll want to maintain a written grazing record, and it doesn't have to be anything special. A lot of people have a calendar book in their pocket, or just a notebook paper, whatever it is. It can be a calendar, whatever, but you need to document your days in and out of each pasture, some sort of measurement of utilization at the end of the growing season. And like I say, you can use calendars, you can take photos. We have grazing sticks in each office that you can utilize to measure the growth that you had that year. because Owen mentioned we're not starting out a very good growing season this year with the drought, so there may be some needed adjustments when it comes to some of these grazing plans, but that can all be worked out when something's no fault of the producer, such as a drought. We have some measures that we could go into. But this slide here kind of explains the grazing. And then this one here kind of talks about the if you're going to use the ground for forage harvest or haying. It's authorized before or after the nesting season, but you wouldn't be able to hay during the nesting season, which is May 1 to August 1. And then we do have some minimum stubble heights. And there's in the producer guide, and I don't have that on a slide, but there's a really good table in there that explains some of the different species. But in general, introduced species, we want a minimum of 3 inches, and for native species 6 inches with the regrowth of 10. And it's subjective a little bit, but that's kind of what we want to shoot for. And then you'll want to work with your NRCS to understand how to maintain that. So some planned deadlines, I guess. I know Fanny had mentioned, we have to sign up by May 13th, and then it'll go up to national, and then they will determine what offers were accepted, and then it comes to NRCS. NRCS has some other programs to work on as well, but we do have to have these plans completed and signed and approved and over to FSA by September 9th of this year, so that they have time enough to get their paperwork done so that the contract start date can happen on October 1. So the deadline to complete the plans is September 9th. And I guess I just threw this slide in here just for some assurance to producers making offers. We got to down here to make these offers. Just know that just because you make an offer, you're not tied to anything. Producers can still back out, basically up until the point, they'll work with NRCS. We'll come out, visit with them in the field, go through the plan with them, put together a conservation plan, explain all the aspects of the plan to them. And even if at that point, after we do all that, they still don't want to proceed with it, they can still back out and there will be no penalty. Once the conservation plan's signed and approved, then you're tied to the terms. So you got quite a bit of time to know what exactly is a part of your conservation plan. You'll know what the job sheets have for specs, all that stuff before any plan will actually, or any contract will actually take effect. That's all I have right now. Now I would like to, I'll just show you a document here. Let's see. Oops. Bear with me a second here. I accidentally hit the wrong button. Okay. I just wanted to pull up this producer. This producer planning sheet that went out with our bulletin to all of our NRCS offices. And I encourage them to share it with their FSA counterparts as well when they're meeting with the producer, sitting at the desk before anything, goes any further than that they can actually, okay, I plan on grazing. This is, here's basically the same information off of them slides. And then here's a table that kind of explains our prescribed grazing standard and the percent weight removed as a relationship to plant height. So it kind of gives you an idea if we're looking at removing, 50%, kind of the weight that we're looking at. So, and it explains the table here. So, but this document is available in the office so that everybody can know what they're actually getting into. So, but that's all I have. If there are any questions, I would do the best I can to answer them.
I'll be a pain and ask you some questions.
That's fine.
Smart. But, you know, as a producer, I mean, I guess I'm kind of wondering, if you do sign up for CRP or Grasslands, does that kick you out of like that, that land? Does it have, you can't do, can you ever do equip on it in the 15 years? Can you do CSP? If say you wanted to come back in and do a windbreak, like a V windbreak, or maybe a shelter belt, can you not put practices on the same land that you have CRP?
Right. Yeah. You wouldn't be able to do that.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Okay.
And I would, I guess, you know, with the water lines, and this is just kind of an insight. If you do have a piece of property, you know, based on the cost share authorities with CRP with water development, if you do have something that you're looking at doing a bunch of cross fencing and installing a bunch of water wells, potentially pumping plants, whatever, the best route for that would probably be to do your equip planning first to get your infrastructure out there and in place.
Okay.
Because, you know, if you've worked with equip, and it sounds like you have in the past, the cost share rates are, I shouldn't say cost share, the payment rates through equip are going to be a lot better than they are through CRP. Just as a little insight, if you're looking at doing a lot of pipelines and some of these properties, just looking at your background here, if you're on your camera here, if you were doing some water lines and water development on property like that, you know, equip would be the route to go to put that in, and any other fencing that you need. And then once that's in place and the equip contract's done, then come in and enroll through Grasslands is how I would recommend that.
Okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
I'll just pop on and see if there's any other questions for either FSA or NRCS. Brandon, thank you. I'm so glad we got an NRCS specialist to jump on and talk about that other piece that really ties into this, Brandon. It was great tie-in with it, because that's another aspect. And yeah, we're talking FSA, CRP, Grasslands, but we got to bring in our partners across the hall as well. So we'll send folks into those USDA service centers, your local service centers. You're going to find FSA and NRCS as well. They're going to work well together. So we ask that producers reach out to their local offices. If you need to find those, Fanny can get you in touch with who that might be. One of us, reach out at any time and we can direct you to those. So I should ask, I've got Fanny back on just in case there's any other follow-up questions that folks or anything you thought of, Fanny. We're right at an hour, so this has been great. Lots of good discussion. Fanny, you always have great questions, and I appreciate how much you do in Indian country for those producers. They are very fortunate to have you on staff, and you have their back, and I love that. So do you have anything else you want to ask us questions from Brandon or Owen?
Well, thank you, Gail. No, I really don't have any more questions right now. I'm sure there'll be something that will pop in my brain and I'll probably reach out to you, but just a few things, since, you know, there's producers on, because this is Facebook Live, so they're listening. Now, let me understand this. So they could send a text message to 372-669, and that's going to give you your deadlines on things, right? It gives you an update.
If there's messages that are correct coming from the county offices specific, that you will receive a text message, and they're very short text messages, but correct. I wish I could pull one up here quick. Like the last one, it may be a deadline, a sign up deadline, anything that's just a brief blast, but that's how you can get it for the county locally where you're at. So
Okay,
I would encourage texting that number. And if you pull it, they'll know if they're already enrolled to it, because like, for instance, I tried it again and that number pulls up in my phone for Brookings, because I'm already getting the Brookings text messages. So if for some reason they make, because you can also get Gov Delivery text through online, but it's much easier to just grab your phone and get signed up for those. So if it's like South Dakota Moody, South Dakota Pennington, South Dakota, you know, whatever that county is, always use SD and keep them together in the county. And then that will send it, and you should get, if the county office is sending out little text, they're going to be short, because we're only allowed so many characters. But I would encourage producers to do that. Email is great as well, the Gov delivery, and I put that link over in the chat. But it just seems like we so many times, right? We have our phone at our disposal to just keep us up to date. And I think that's just great. It's a tool in their hand. And at that time, like respond back right then, call the office. You know, if you get something, it's okay. We would rather hear from you and say, hey, did I need to sign something? And we'll say, let us check to make sure. Because just like you talk, like it's almost a foreign language. It's a lot like that. We have like several different programs going on at one time even. So we don't want to miss anyone for any applicable program they may be eligible for. So a phone call in lets us say, you know, they'll say, hey, I need to check. I got a message. Is that, and it's a simple check for us, you know, in the system, or say, oh, you know what, you were on our list. We need to get this from you and so and so. So anytime they get those messages or have questions, or after today, if we're talking about programs, or certainly with disaster programs, and I'll mention that because of our livestock indemnity program, if there's livestock losses, reach out to those county offices. Make sure you have contact and know how to get a hold of those folks. And they can even help you get signed up for these Gov delivery bulletins, email blasts as well, and texts. I think that's kind of the first place to send them, or like, Fanny, I know you know how to do this and can help them with some of those, but.
Yeah. You know, I think that's really great. I like the text message thing, because most of the producers I know, they will text message. A lot of the getting on the online and on the web, not so much sometimes.
Right.
That's kind of more your younger generation thing going on there. And so, yeah, this is really going to be nice for the ones maybe a little older, or maybe not so tech savvy, because most of them do have phones. So remember this number, and I'll put it on the Great Plains Facebook, because I know a lot of you do Facebook. I know they do Facebook. So,
Yep.
And it's 372-669. You text it in and you get signed up. And like the ones around in my area, it would be SD ZBot, SD Dewey. And then, you know, I can list the other counties and on the other reservations. That's a really good one, because then you don't want to miss these deadlines and stuff, especially ones that have been hit by this storm, and to report your livestock losses.
Absolutely.
I mean, very important. Be sure to take your pictures. You know, you got to document, write things down, you know, so you can go in and report those. So.
And everything seems to have timeframes and deadlines with FSA. So the sooner you can do it and get in, or at least make a first contact with us, just like you said, then we've got that initial contact and we can get you and say, okay, let's keep going. And another option is we can actually do email to text. So it might be like we had a list of producers for ARC PLC in Brookings County. She can actually send an email, but it texts to certain people that we needed to hear from them. So we've got some options as well by having your cell phone numbers in our offices, in our information, and too, when you get signed up for the text. Like I said, we're starting to use that more. We'll meet you where you're at. If it said we can reach you by cell phone and text, we're going to head that direction. So yeah, but just document and call the offices locally, call Fanny, call one of us, and we'll direct you. We'll just make that initial contact. So.
Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks, Gail. Thanks, Owen. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate you guys taking the time to do this. And Gail's the one who reached out to me, and she's like, hey, would you like to do something, you know, online again, live webinar, something to get the word out on your Grasslands CRP. So I really appreciate that, Gail. I really do.
Absolutely. We had a great thing going. It's fun to collaborate with you. And this is how we'll just work together on some of these programs. So we shall meet again. Until then, you take care.
You too. Bye, everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye.